It's really a big moment, but not the end of the road.
So do you think Russia will move away quietly? And hello and welcome. My name is Dr.Joanne Lisosky, and I'm an author and journalism educator. And we're here today to talk about things that are of importance to the Caucasus. And with me today is Ambassador Matthew Bryza, former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. And Ambassador Bryza was also a former Minsk co-chair. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lisosky. Great to be with you again. Long time no see.
Yes, thank you. As a former ambassador to Azerbaijan, it's a pretty exciting day. What is your take on this historic event in the White House?
Well, the day's even more exciting for me as the longtime U.S. mediator of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, as you mentioned, as the U.S. co-chair of something called the Minsk Group, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. Our job was to try to help the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia get to this point where they got today. So this is a really big moment. It's not the end of the road in ending the conflict, but it's a big moment. So this is not a peace treaty. This is an agreement, basically a statement of intent by President Aliyev of Azerbaijan and Prime Minister Pashinyan of Armenia to move forward to the signing or the signing of a peace treaty. And I understand, I haven't seen text of today's agreement, but it defines specific steps that each leader is committed to take to get to the point where they can sign a peace treaty. And so that in itself is very, very significant. So this is really a breakthrough moment, or переломный момент, as they say in Russian. Then another very significant element of all of this is that there will be strategic partnership agreements, or there were, signed between the U.S. and Azerbaijan on one hand and the U.S. and Armenia on another hand. And then there's another part, which is an agreement for joint development by Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the United States of the corridor that the Azerbaijani side calls the Zangezur corridor, but that will now be called the Trump Road for International Peace and Prosperity, that runs through Armenia and links Azerbaijan to Armenia to the exclave part of Azerbaijan, separated from the mainland part of Azerbaijan called Nakhchivan. That corridor will also then extend into Turkey, or Turkey, and it will be operated by apparently a U.S. logistics company, which will then replace the Russian Federal Security Service, or FSB, troops that were originally going to operate that corridor, much to the chagrin of the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia. But President Putin essentially compelled President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan to agree to that Russian military presence in that corridor in November of 2020, at the end of the military phase of the Second Karabakh War. And so I think Azerbaijan and Armenia look at this moment today as not only getting them one step closer to a peace treaty, but bringing the United States in as Russia recedes with the U.S., not as a guarantor of security, but as, the world's most powerful country at a moment when the U.S. president wants to use investment by U.S. and projects by U.S. companies to have an American presence on the ground, which replaces a Russian presence, and a Russian presence, not in a military sense, but in a geopolitical and geoeconomic sense. And that Russian presence has been for centuries seen in Armenia as the guarantor of Armenia's security. And now there's an embrace of the United States. So it's really a big moment, but not the end of the road.
So do you think Russia will move away quietly and not be involved in this at all?
Well, I don't, nobody, neither Azerbaijan nor Armenia's leaders want Russia involved anymore in any further way. Previously, Azerbaijan tried to maintain, a balanced foreign policy whereby it staked its future, its economic and even political future on connecting itself to the transatlantic community via Turkey and Georgia through its oil and gas pipelines, and B, maintaining good relations with Russia. But since last December, when Russian air defenses shot down a commercial Azerbaijani passenger jet over Chechnya, and President Putin never accepted responsibility, never apologized, therefore never offered compensation. President Aliyev has been furious, and Azerbaijani-Russian relations have deteriorated drastically. So Azerbaijan is ready then to enjoy a strategic embrace by Washington, by the United States, and the same for Armenia. Armenia has moved away from Russia's orbit that had been its fundamental security guarantee for centuries. And that happened really, it began to happen. Armenia began to move away from Russia in November 2020 after it lost the Second Karabakh War to Azerbaijan, and Russian forces didn't intervene under the Collective Security Treaty Organization to stop the Azerbaijanis. And then after September 2023, when Azerbaijan had a final military operation that was precise, in which no civilians were even harmed, much less killed, to eliminate the separatist ethnic Armenian regime on Azerbaijani territory, when Russian peacekeepers on the ground didn't intervene to stop that, Armenia said, okay, we're not going to be so engaged with Russia anymore. We're going to look toward Europe and the United States for our security now. That's where we are now.
So some say that Iran is furious about this deal. What do you say? What will the fallout be from Iran?
Yeah. Oh, and so the fallout from Russia is, I think, by the way, I think they will use what's called active measures, dirty tricks to try to undermine political stability. There are a whole range of tactics they can employ. And I think Iran's going to try to do the same. They always have been. When I was serving in Baku as ambassador, both sides were up to all sorts of dirty tricks. And sometimes those dirty tricks are deadly and can involve murder, can involve fomenting unrest, sabotage, all sorts of things. Like, I don't know of anything imminent, but I just don't think that Russia and Iran are simply going to say, okay, we lost geopolitically. The U.S. increased its influence. Azerbaijan and Armenia really don't like us so much anymore. Okay, that's fine. Let's move on. That's just not how Russia and Iran work.
So what exactly does the U.S. gain from exclusive development rights in the Zangezur or the TRIP corridor?
Well, we haven't seen the text yet of the agreement, so it's hard to be precise. But certainly, American companies who invest will hopefully turn a profit. I don't know how exactly they'll do that. I think that they'll charge some sort of tolls for operating the corridor. I don't know how lucrative that'll be, but it'll mean something. I think we'll also see opportunities for U.S. investors to come in and invest in Azerbaijan, but in Armenia, and in projects involving maybe Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, because I expect Turkey and Armenia now to normalize their relations very quickly. And one of my dreams since the end of the Second Karabakh War in 2020 was to develop organized industrial zones or green energy zones simultaneously on the territories of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey. It's sort of a unified investment plan. So I think that's possible now. Again, that could be good for U.S. investors. But what the U.S. gets from Trump's perspective is peace and the resolution of a conflict, which for Trump is in itself a benefit, the way he looks at the world. B, he himself thinks he may get a Nobel Peace Prize out of this. You heard President Aliyev propose during the press conference at the White House today to Prime Minister Pashinyan that they both jointly nominate President Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. That's music to Trump's ears. That's why he got involved in this in the first place. And then finally, the U.S. gets some sort of abstract sense of greater geopolitical influence in the South Caucasus, which had been quite high under the administration of President George W. Bush, and then really went away under Presidents Obama and Biden. And I say that, by the way, as a nominee for ambassador by President Obama. I'm not being partisan here. It was just a conscious choice made by the Obama administration to reduce the U.S. Involvement in the South Caucasus as a way to help reduce irritations with Russia as part of the Russia reset policy. While that sort of abstract notion of geopolitical influence may not mean much to my fellow Americans, it's seems like it's not really tangible. Oh, it means a heck of a lot to Russia. They believe they design their foreign policy on a concept, a Soviet-era concept called the correlation of forces, which is a philosophical notion that if all the economic, political, and security forces are increasing the influence of your country, then you are, quote unquote, winning.
Well, finally, Mr. Ambassador, what should we be watching for? What are the next steps?
Yeah, we should definitely be watching for what you brought up already. What sort of spoiler roles Russia and Iran might try to play. I don't think they'll do that immediately. They would wait for a long time. Next thing is to see if Prime Minister Pashinyan is able to gain traction now with President Trump's support with the Armenian parliament to persuade the Armenian parliament to amend Armenia's constitution such that a bit of language that is ambiguous about these territories of Azerbaijan being able to remain Azerbaijani, or whether the constitution of Armenia calls for Karabakh to be either independent or part of Armenia, that needs to be removed from the constitution, according to Azerbaijan, which is understandable, right? How can you have peace with a country whose constitution says part of your territory is theirs? Prime Minister Pashinyan has said, we, Armenia, we should do this because we want peace. And if we don't do it, there could be another war. But the revanchist ultranationalists in Armenia who haven't wanted to settle the conflict are very much against what I just said, the amendment to the constitution. So Pashinyan hasn't been able to implement that or amendment to the Armenian constitution, which is why there hasn't been a peace treaty signed since the two countries agreed on the text of a peace treaty way back in March. So watch that space. Will President Trump be able to strengthen Prime Minister Pashinyan enough that Prime Minister Pashinyan persuades the Armenian parliament to amend its constitution? And then watch for what sort of investment projects might develop on this corridor, but first see what sort of agreements are reached and who the investors on the U.S. side will be and the logistics company operating that corridor. Those are the next three big things I think to watch.